Okay, this section is, I mean, it's billed as around the world in radio. It's a tiny little tour, but there's a couple of, there's a German piece, a French piece, a British piece, but I did it myself, so it doesn't really count. I should have put another one in, but that's okay. And we have an American one, I think. Is it Bob Erb? Is that?
No.
That's Canadian?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fine. And I think we even added a quirky little thing at the end, which has nothing to do with the world, but whatever. I just thought perhaps I could begin. I went to it still exists, the International Features Conference, which started in the 70s, was started in the 70s by a group of producers, one of whom was from CBC, Don Mowat, who used to work out of Vancouver, who retired some years ago, but he and a small group of like-minded people felt in the 70s that radio documentary features, they felt lonely, like we kind of feel lonely, and misery loves company. So they conceived of getting together every year just to sit and talk about the craft and play their stuff and discuss it and critique it in an honest way, and help each other out. And so people come, and it's still, the International Features Conference still happens. We hosted it here in Toronto in 2003, but usually it takes place somewhere in Europe. I'm fighting as we speak to keep CBC to keep sending people to it, but that's another story. I wrote, one of the first ones I went to is, it says here in 1991, I keep a little book here of things that leap out at me, and anything that seems useful. So, from the Berlin Features Conference in 1991, notes and quotes. Here. So this is stuff that I picked up in the conference, and frankly, I have to say, we're all besotted right now, and fair enough, with podcasts and This American Life and Serial and Radio Lab and all the other wonderful Love and Radio and all that stuff and it's fantastic stuff being made. But it is only one piece of, there's a whole other world of radio making out there, which I went to the Third Coast Chicago conference last November on my own dime. On my own dime, are you listening? And there was wonderful, like 450, did somebody, was anybody there? No.
I was there a couple years ago.
Yeah, maybe you had the same, the biggest attendance ever, 450 I think it was, and most of people are 20s, 30s, maybe early 40s. Explosion of radio, audio, podcasts, whatever in the States. And there's some fantastic stuff being made, but it's kind of in a lovely bubble, a North American bubble. So I take you to other people here briefly. Berlin Features Conference, notes and quotes. Not that this is, I'm sure any decent producer would, anywhere you live would. Anyway, I wrote, sound is the continuation of dialogue, not an illustration of it. Use sound as information. Sound is a continuation of dialogue, not an illustration of it. And so, for example, if someone says to me, which they often do, okay, I've got my clips, I've got my stuff, now I need my sound. And they even call it SFX, as in sound FX. And I think to myself, uh-oh, we are on the wrong track here. Because you don't just brush the sound. You can, I'm not saying anything you can do is legal as long as it works. But basically, it's better to think of sound as a part of the storytelling. And in fact, you could even take it further, only sound that comes out of the scenes which you decide to create is the sound you use. Of course we use sound, all kinds of other sounds, and that's fine, but fundamentally. Okay, more poetry, less teaching, said somebody. These were quotes. More poetry, less teaching, and the message will be stronger. So I get from that, if you want to preach, if you conceive of your work as didactic, what you're really doing is trying to tell someone what they should think. I would say that's not a recipe for a good documentary. If you want a pulpit, go into the church. Pauses are part of life too. We kind of scared of silence, scared of dead air, blah, blah, blah. Yes, of course there's dead air. And I didn't have it down here, but later an Australian producer once said, and I heard this, he says, you have to earn your pauses, which is a distinction between dead air and the pregnant pause, right? So if a space where nobody says anything is filled by what you have created just before it, then you've done your job. If it's filled with nothing, then you edit it. But pauses, but we have this urge to keep filling up space, especially in North America. You know, if it's silent, oh, it's scary. Pauses are part of life too, so please don't think that pauses are just to be cut. Chris Brooks has a wonderful, was it Chris Brooks? He submitted a piece to a doc, I'm not sure if it's Chris Brooks, somebody. The piece was about a minute too long for the spot, and the editor came back and said, I fixed it. He said, what did you do? So I just cut out all the pauses. 30, yeah, seriously. Cut out all the pauses, piece of cake. So I offer that. Counterpoint, by which, well, you know, without other people, tension, counterpoint, conflicting ideas, antagonism, protagonism, whatever, counterpoint. Without it, all you have is a nice piece. Ooh, what a nice piece that was. That's a killer, you know. What do you think of it? Oh, it was a nice piece. You failed. There was nothing really there. Distance. This is a tricky one. Distance. I constantly hear people, heard them and do, like, you've got to create spaces, distance, and I trying to wrestle this to the ground, and I think I got here the art of putting one element in a story into perspective by other elements in this documentary. I'm not sure if I've got that right. So that's an elusive one for me still, I have to say. There's so much subtlety in this.
Distance with the listener?
It's not acoustic distance. That's another beautiful thing, by the way, which distance from a microphone and letting the space open up. But this is story difference, story distance. I think it's a shift in perspective all the time that we're talking about, maybe. The events in a story perhaps as, this is going to sound way too literal, as seen by different players in the story. It's more than that, it's more subtle than that, but there's something about shifting perspectives, I think, and opening up some space for the listener to think about it, not just be, here's one that is fairly easy to get. A plain subject must be treated in a dramatic or odd way. A dramatic subject must be treated in a plain way. It's not, I mean, must is too strong, but, you know. Gray on, I wrote here, gray on gray equals gray. Okay. Another one, mistakes. You need some to let the people into the story. Okay, if you take out all the little bumps, warts, and mistakes, and hiccups, and little imperfections that actually life is made up of, then you probably end up with a shiny object that the listener can just admire, but doesn't really, doesn't get to the gut. I'm riffing on that. Too many sounds can kill fantasies. That's interesting. Too many sounds. So sound, somebody else said sound, a filmmaker, sound is best used when it's suggestive, not literal. So the sense of a sound, the echo of a sound, the representation of a sound, not the actual sound, is more powerful for the listener. It creates mystery. Oh, here's one, the Danes. We haven't got a Danish piece because I'm not playing it today, but the Danes are known for finding one person who is in crisis and putting his or her story on the radio. Fine, I guess we do that too. The Belgians, national characteristic. Feet in the muck and heads in the clouds. I like that. That's a really earthy story, but goes right up into the ether. Huge stretch in the documentary. Last one. Yeah. Okay, finally, which reminds me of George Orwell's last comments about politics. Have you read Orwell's essay, Politics in the English Language? About rules about writing. And his last one is lovely. Break all the above rules if you really have to. Like, rules are there to be broken. If you haven't got or can't see the tension, counterpoint, distancing, I think it's just me talking. If you haven't got or can't see, because you're too thick, the tension, counterpoint, distancing, framing, and yet the piece still works, who says it works, then fine. The quote that I got here is, a feature is a feature if someone wants to listen to it. So, like, don't get hung up too much on the rules, for crying out. Like, so the rules are there to be, it's like avant-garde.
That someone is your mom.
Avant-garde composers break the rules, but they know the rules before they break them, usually, I think. And those that don't know the rules before breaking them, I don't think they have long careers, but I could be wrong. Okay, to the stuff. The first clip, more than a clip really, which is the German one, is from 1973, German radio, a classic which you may have heard, Bells in Europe. It was a little bit about the producer of this, because he is alive and well and in his 80s and still living in Berlin. I first met him at a features conference way back, and oh man, I mean, he is ever scary. I mean, he would just listen to what you played, and then he'd draw a deep breath, and and you're ready, he says, Steve. Actually, I can tell a real story on this, because this actually happened. Okay, this is true. Bernie Lucht, who was the producer of Ideas for many, many years, was in 77-ish, I think, went to one of his features conferences. He took with him an excerpt, a half-hour excerpt of an Ideas program, which he was very proud of. And it was a good Ideas program by the criteria of Ideas. Fine. And he played it. And there's a whole lot of people around the table, maybe 20 or so from all over the world. Some Americans, Canadians, Europeans, even from sometimes Africa and Asia. And one of the things about the features conferences, which I like, is that critique is fearless. It's even more fearless over drinks afterwards, but it's quite fearless at the time. And that's great, because I think, I don't know about you, but one of the hardest things to get around here is honest criticism. People are too goddamn polite to say what they think. How can you learn from your mistakes if people don't point them out to you? So I do urge us all in a collegial way to be totally honest. I mean, if you think the piece is boring, say so. If you think that clip is out of place, say so. And try and help your buddy out by offering a suggestion maybe. But don't just say, I do it, because you don't want to upset someone. They put their heart and soul into a piece. You don't want to say, geez, that was a piece of shit. Why would I listen to that? But that's what you think, maybe. So you've got to figure out, I honestly urge you that we will all help each other a lot more if we're honest. So they do that. So there's Bernie, and he's playing his piece. And it comes to an end, this excerpt from Ideas, and Bernie sits. He's never been to one of these things before. And there's a long silence in the room, which is, of course, the scariest thing you want to hear, because nobody actually really wants to say what they think. It's hardly fair to Bernie, because it was a case of apples and oranges, to be honest. I mean, he shouldn't have taken that piece, but he didn't know. So there's a long pause, and then the leader of the group, head of the herd, Peter Leo Brown, has to say something. So he lifts his head off the table, where it has been for quite a while, thinking perhaps, or maybe he's getting over the beer that he had the night before. And this is the way Bernie tells it. And Bernie happens to be sitting close to, and he said, Bernie, I'll affect a Berlin accent here. Bernie, do you know what we are trying to do here? But, well, we're blah, 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 blah. Bernie, you have brought a piece which is information. which is ideas, right? What we are trying to do is tell about life. Quote. Thank you, Peter Leo Brown. Bernie has never forgotten it. Peter Leo Brown is the guy who when he did a piece about the bikers in Berlin, if you and I were doing a piece about bikers, like, you know, Harley, whatever, you probably wouldn't think of, and if you did, you probably wouldn't have the clout to get the Toronto Symphony and the Thompson Hall people to clear the stage and clear off a whole day to bring in 5 or 6 bikes, put them on the stage, rev them up, creating all kinds of God knows what pollution and noise and everything else, all of which he did for a documentary called Biker in Germany in the 70s. Not just because he wanted the sound of a bike, not messed up by stuff in the street or ambient, so he wanted the real sound of the bike. And he didn't just want the noisy stuff, he wanted all of that. He wanted also the sound that hot metal makes when it cools down. This click, 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 click. You've heard the contraction of hot metal, right? You know, these little sounds, right? Because you get those sounds. He wanted all the sounds, and so I just offer that. That's the kind of guy he is. And in this piece, Bells, you will hear some sounds of military, you'll hear gunshots, you'll hear heavy artillery, you'll hear what the script will talk about, tanks, I believe. Just so that you know, if you want, you can find this all online, it's all there. There's a wonderful photo somewhere of Peter Leo Brown, I think, and his technician hiding behind a load of sandbags. He got the German army out to roll tanks and do things so that he gets the real sound. So, you know, we're not all like Leo, but I just want you to know that's the kind of guy we're talking about. So here's a bit of background which I dug up yesterday, written actually by Don Mowat of CBC Vancouver, who retired, but I think it might be worth just quickly reading this first. In 1970 in Berlin, Peter Leo Brown began the production of a new type of radio feature that rapidly won recognition in Germany and eventually was emulated throughout Europe, North America, and Asia. This is all pre-This American Life. Up to this time, the documentary had been dominated by a simple, print-inspired linear form with little attention to musical concepts of rhythm, counterpoint, or texture. Soon, highly imaginative pieces of 15 minutes or up to 1 hour were winning international awards, inspiring the creation of newer, more accurate recording technology and gaining enthusiastic new audiences. What had once been merely a clever editing of interview components, together with a narrator and some music, that's the old-style studio-based feature, now became a richly textured and complexly orchestrated blend of journalistic, musical, and dramatic values that became variously referred to as sound movies, oral essays, A-U-R-A-L, essays, or simply radiophonic features. The story was the foundation of radio and is probably still its strongest core, but how the story is told changes constantly. When technology develops, we hear in new ways and new layers, etc., etc., etc. Glenn Gould was one of the first to experiment in Canada with overlapping voices. Of course, he was a nutbar and he got away with it, but that's fantastic. I'm being terrible here. To give effect, as he said, of a bus ride, okay, fine, where you tune in and out of several different conversations going, that's a nice starting point, going on around you. The idea of north, etc. Anybody heard, do you know the Gould stuff? Anybody not heard any of that? Okay. Yeah. The 1960s and early 70s, the Solitude trilogy is the 3 main works. North, Mennonites, and Newfoundland. 3 main pieces. Anyway, composing with speech is essentially what he was doing, I think. Etc., etc., etc. Peter Brown pioneered the form of an audio poem where sounds were continuous, threaded only by a detached narrator, etc., etc., etc. Very soon it became obvious that the style that he developed in his audio essay, Bells in Europe, which we will hear, was seriously challenged by colleagues from other countries. A Danish colleague pinpointed the problem when he compared Peter Brown's works, which we will now hear, to an enormous state-of-the-art luxury ocean liner with everything on board you could ever want except people. it was, of course, an exaggeration. So, you can imagine the Danish producer saying, the Germans are full of, where's the people in your pieces, Peter? No. Do you know what we are trying to do here? People. You can't go on and on just making sound essays in this way without making more use of the human voice or voices in the context of their natural surrounding. So this is a critique and a criticism, actually, of what we're about to hear. So we'll stop there, and let's play it. We're just going to play the first few minutes, I believe, from Bell's. Now this is the German, isn't it? Yes, this is not the English, so this is in the original German. Try not to read ahead, if I may ask. Try to listen just to read actually as it comes to you.
Eine Glocke ist ein Schrei aus Metall. Erfunden, weil es lebensnotwendig für den Menschen war, Alarm und Gefahr schneller zu verbreiten, als er laufen konnte, und weiter als seine eigene Stimme trug. Feuer, Sturm, Überschwemmung, Überfall, Flucht. Eine Glocke ist der Gemeindediener. Sie ruft Versammlungen, Gottesdienste und die Uhrzeit. Trauungen sagt sie an, Taufen, Sterbefälle. Eine Glocke ist Musik. Sie singt die Feste, verherrlicht Gott und jubelt Frieden. Eine Glocke ist eine Prostituierte. Sie brüllt, was man will. Auch Mord, Verschwörung, Revolution, Hinrichtung, Pest, Hunger, Krieg. Eine Glocke ist Material, Kupfer und Zinn. Und das ist ihr Verhängnis. Im Kriegsjahr 1940 erlässt die nationalsozialistische Regierung den kalten Befehl, dass zur Sicherung der Metallreserve für eine Kriegsführung auf lange Sicht sämtliche deutschen Kirchenglocken der Rüstungsindustrie ausgeliefert werden müssen. Kupfer und Zinn sind strategische Metalle. Ihr natürliches Vorkommen auf deutschem Gebiet nicht nennenswert. Nach Absicht Hermann Görings sollen in ganz Deutschland nur 10 Glocken erhalten bleiben. Die Kirchenbehörden erreichen als äußerstes Zugeständnis die Erhaltung von 5%. 47.000 Glocken. Gesamtverlust. Messingkartuschen für Granaten und Maschinengewehrmunition. Kupfer in die Achslager schwerer Motore. Die Flugzeugindustrie braucht unaufhörlich Zinn. Und die deutsche Kriegsmaschine, dieser gepanzerte Koloss, wälzt sich langsam über Europa. Die deutschen Glocken reichen nicht mehr aus. Polen liefert Glocken ab. Tschechoslowakei, Holland, Belgien, Frankreich, Italien, Österreich, Ungarn. 33.000 Glocken für die deutsche Rüstungsindustrie. Bei Kriegsende herrscht in Europa Friedhofsruhe. Insgesamt 80.000 Glocken fehlen. In den Türmen hängt oft nur noch eine Glocke, die kleinste, die Totenglocke. Auf dem schmalen Friedhof vor der ungarischen Provinzstadt Sopron läutet die Totenglocke für den alten László Bosó, gestorben vor 3 Tagen. Sie läutet, dass der Pfarrer jetzt das Haus des Totengräbers verlassen hat und auf die Kapelle zugeht. Die Anverwandten sitzen, die Freunde stehen. Goldverzierter Sarg, Blumen, brennende Kerzen. Überall in Europa, in jeder Sprache, ist diese letzte Inszenierung gleich. Für alle.
Any quick thoughts? Those of you who've heard it before, that's one thing, but maybe you haven't heard it. This is 1973, stereo documentary, 40 minutes long. Maybe I should just tell you how it goes on, where it goes from there quickly. He starts with, obviously, the innocence of the metal, if I may put it that way, that the metal itself is malleable and transformable, and it's the bells, the metal has usually a fairly peaceful purpose, the metal in terms of bells, and we transform it into an article of war. And then what you'll hear later in the piece to the end is as the war is finished and the cannons and the military hardware that's left over, I guess, is indeed melted down back and made bells again. So it's a kind of, has that huge moralistic perhaps stretch, I don't know. But, or maybe it's just the prototype recycling story, I don't know. But that's the stretch of the piece. And it was also produced at a time when the European Union Broadcasting, European Community, whatever it was called in those days, was beginning. And it had it's nothing really to do with the documentary, but Leo got colleagues in different European countries to record the sounds of the bells in their own cities for this piece. So it also was a pan-European piece. It had a second, but that doesn't matter so much. It was a cooperative piece, but Leo was in charge of the whole thing. And so you hear the bells and you hear what happened to the metal. That's basically the thrust of it. So any comments, thoughts, reactions?
Do I have to use the mic?
Oh, yes. Good.
I guess heard it a few times in different versions, and I've always been struck. I really like the setup. I really like making the bell the character, and I like that contrast of the good and bad, or the evil and peaceful. But I guess for me, it's I never hear it as intimate. It always seems higher level, like it is more of an academic-y essay or thought piece. And I feel like because the sound of the bell is so intimate, and the sound that it makes is so sort of gets you inside, that you want to go closer, I guess. So.
Yeah, the scenes that you didn't hear, it's a journey through different bells in different countries, different scenes. There's the next one up is a flood in, I think, Holland, and which happened in the 50s. And the dikes burst and the water flooded in and lots of people were drowned, and the bells were supposed to warn people, etc. And then there's the christening, the birth, and then there's a funeral rather here, and then there's a christening later on at the very end, which is clearly the sort of coming back to life and new beginning and everything, etc. etc. So it is a sort of a journey through it. I mean, there's a kind of a didactic purpose perhaps behind the whole piece, maybe, but. It's an essay. It is an essay, really, I suppose, in its essential construction. Yeah, yeah. 1973, a long time ago.
I was going to say that it could be because of, the distancing due to the translation. It's hard to get intimate with something when you're trying to read the translation for me. But I felt like it did expect a lot more of the listener than we do today. Maybe because it was quite a philosophical piece. It was extremely poetic. I had to think quite a bit and pay attention to get it, although I felt like I got what I wanted to get out of it. But and I thought it very much was scene making, in the sense it was certainly a big long shot. You felt kind of this birth, and then down to an intimacy of one individual person who's named, and the death, and how what's killed that person is, the materials from a bell turned into a weapon. So you really had to think. I wonder how well audiences would do today with it. Just curious on that. But.
And on that note, how would you think, the setup to the opening sequence is interesting to me. I think it's quite lovely. You can only hear the birth of a bell. That's intriguing. That'll keep me going for a while. Yeah. But listen how, I even interrupted it to say to you about that, listen how long that is. And that's, I think it runs probably a couple of minutes or something. And it has its cadence at the end as the bubbles come up to the surface, and then emerges the bell. So it has that sort of dramatic shape to it. But I wonder whether we would say, geez, don't we fade this down and say something? Similarly, the male choir in the church, I don't know if there were other verses, but at least we do hear a complete arc of a verse in the church. So again, I think, with our ears, we probably say, geez, don't we fade and talk? So but yes,
It's not an obvious sound, that first one. It sounds like slurpy, muddy, you can't really figure out what it is. So I think, and for the amount of time that it played, today, if that just played on the radio, that might not come across if you're, what you said, 60 kilometers an hour driving.
Yep.
I wouldn't know. I'm up close to it,
Yes.
and I'm like, oh, and now that you've set the scene for me, I can picture it, but it requires a level of patience, The other thing I was going to say, I really agree with you about that the character of the bell, and I think that he really could have used that more, that whole section. And I think bells sound different for different settings, and I think he could have played up on that a little bit more.
Which one are you?
The beginning part, that when he's going through all the uses for a bell.
Oh, okay.
Just I think a bell is a bell, but I think he could have made a scene for each bell sound or something. Like he could have used more of the sound of the bell. I wanted to hear
but
more.
Behind
of the
it
sound
was
of the bell.
a melange of bells, if I remember. He's got a floaty mixture of different belly sounds behind this text. Right?
Yeah.
So he's got it. It's not. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree, though. I felt really far away from it. Like I could sort of hear it, but it wasn't. I couldn't picture it or something.
I love the opening script. I have to say, I must admit, it's like a poem almost for me. And I think, I'm just speaking for myself, would I ever write something like that in my, people would think you're pompous ass or something, wouldn't they? I don't know. I mean, it has to be very good to get away with it. But I mean, for me, I like the metaphors personally. But you know, whatever. I just think it's like a little poem unto itself. And I'll say what I like, maybe. I love, and every time I hear it, it just makes me tingle. I know it's going to happen. I've heard this so many times. I know it, and every time I just think, oh man, this lovely, swirling, bubbling, coming out of the ground, the birth of this bell, and we kind of see it, you know, this little boing. He uses that device a couple of times, and you don't want to use it too often. But the first time I heard it, oh my God, you know, there's the baby, there's the bell, right there, bang. You know, it's just beautiful. I like that. The facts of the war, interesting. I didn't know that before I heard this piece. I'm not a student of the Second World War. I found that interesting. It's probably happened throughout the ages. It probably happened over the centuries too, as long as metal's been cast. But still, I like the fairly obvious, I suppose, thematic link that the silence of Europe is that of a graveyard after the war, which it was, and literally and figuratively, to the first scene, obviously, is a funeral and a graveyard. I mean, it's probably an obvious first scene, but I kind of like the thematic connection there. He kind of overdoes it, maybe. This closing scene is the same for everybody. Well, yes and no. But I kind of like this shifting of the opposites, moving. I can feel a sense of crossing the line I just wrote down a few that, like past and present, good and evil, if you want to put it that way, war and peace, I mean, maybe silence and noise, I don't know, innocence and complicity or whatever. I mean, the particular to the universal. I mean, just people often ask when you're developing a story, to think in terms of opposites and put what they call a line of tension. You know, try and think what themes are operating in the story and see if you can, just to help, you know, not miss things and try and dig into what the piece is supposed to be about. So, yeah, any last thoughts? We did an English translation, Ideas did, I should say, years and years ago, which is okay. I like the sound of the German. It has that sound to it, you know. So I played it for you with the original. Next up, something, as Monty Python would say, something completely different. And what you're about to hear is actually, I shouldn't say too much, but rule number one of storytellers, don't give it away at the beginning. But it's kind of Monty Python-esque, but it actually happened. What setup do I need for this? Okay. This is actually a piece that I made, a scene from a piece that I made. It's in the foreign section because it's a British story. That's probably it. And it's also, parenthetically, a way of creating a scene, so to speak, by juxtaposition of interviews recorded separately. What you're going to hear are two voices, basically, both recorded at different places and different times, but by the magic of editing brought together. The reason being to try and answer a simple question: what happened on the moor that night? The moor meaning a moor in the UK, wherein there was perhaps a murder attempt, perhaps on somebody who, a very famous and powerful politician of the time, wanted to get out. Who will rid me of this troublesome priest? Who will rid me of this troublesome person? The man that I'm speaking of died only a few weeks ago. His name is Jeremy Thorpe. As it happens, ran some pieces about it. And actually, I think they played this. So if you've heard this already, that's different. I think they actually played this clip. Jeremy Thorpe was the leader of the British Liberal Party, which was the third party. It's in the three-part system there, 3 parties. And he was charged with conspiracy to murder his homosexual lover. That we need to know. 1978, thereabouts. And the 2 people you'll hear are the man who it was, I say alleged because in the trial that came up afterwards, he was acquitted, basically. Don't ask. His name is Norman Scott. You'll hear that name. He is the man with the gun. And the victim, the person who was allegedly was going to be killed, is a Norman Scott. And Norman Scott was the alleged homosexual lover of Jeremy Thorpe. So this is a very powerful politician who had a personal secret that he didn't want divulged, and he was willing to kill to keep it, allegedly. So it's a big story. It was huge. Can you imagine translating that into Canadian terms now, right? Justin Trudeau hires a hitman to kill so-and-so, right? Or somebody does. You know, huge. So I was sent off by Starwitz at Sunday morning in 1978 to go out and get the documentary. So what you'll hear is an attempt to answer the simple question, what happened on the moor that night? Only 2 people were there. What is the truth of this incident? Who knows? Only what they will tell you. And there was a dog as well. But that's so. No, it's in English. It's in Monty Python English. So here's Jeremy Thorpe. This is a scene from a 36-minute documentary.
We drove up Porlock Hill. It's a very dark night, and I pulled the car up. Faking to be tired, Norman Scott offered to drive, and as he got out of the car, I pulled the gun out. I shot the dog. I do like dogs, you know, and I received a number of letters from people who are dog lovers, but I had to get rid of the dog because it was such an enormous beast that, and was told by Norman Scott that he'd only have to click his fingers and it ripped my throat out.
I didn't hear any bangs.
You didn't hear the shot?
I've never ever heard the bang, which is a very strange thing, because there was no silencer on the gun, because, I now know there wasn't, because a silencer is a very long thing. And anyway, the dog sort of sank down in front of me, Rinka sank down in front of me. And I sort of looked down, then I went down, you know, to try and, just shake her. I couldn't believe it. And I said, oh, you can't involve the dog. You know, why have you done this? And he said, oh, now it's your turn.
The thinking was that if I could bugger up the 10th, then I could go back to Holmes and say, look, I tried to you know, do the act, but Norman Scott ran away. The gun jammed. What really frustrated this attempt was when I, in fact, did pull the gun on Scott, he froze like a custard. And instead of running away, just stood there. And what I, in fact, did was levelled the gun at him and said, right, it's your turn, and pretended the gun had jammed.
And he said, oh, fuck it, fuck it, fuck it. I heard him really shouting it out, oh, fuck it, like an animal, sort of screaming, oh, fuck it, fuck it, fuck it. He's obviously really worried. I mean...
Well, he'd blown the job.
Well, his amount, he'd been paid, was to be paid 10,000 quid, although he only got, well, never mind. Anyway, he shook the gun, and then he levelled it at me absolutely like that, once more, you know, held it right up and levelled it at me, and like an animal, he sort of cried out, oh, fuck it, and got back into the car, and he screamed, I'll get you.
You mean to say you went all to those lengths and with no intention of killing him on the moor?
Well, look, Sunshine, when you've, you know, got people sort of trying to kill somebody, you're not dealing with sort of fairyland figures.
I was trying to give Rinka the kiss of life, as stupid it sounds, but, you know, trying to breathe into her. And then this car came along. I ran out and tried to stop them and wave them down. And of course I was covered in blood because I'd had my head, you know, trying to make her breathe. So I was all covered. They thought I'd been shot. I said, my dog's been shot, but it was so garbled. They thought I'd been shot. And then, I mean, in all my nerves and worry, I said, it's all because of Jeremy Thorpe. You see, even then, even in my shock, I realized it.
You said that, right?
Yes, I said it's because of Jeremy Thorpe.
Well, they don't make them like that anymore, do they?
Oh, no, they don't, Sunshine.
Isn't that wild? I mean, does a custard freeze? I don't know where that comes from. Like, froze like a custard. I mean, I do like dogs. You know, I got a lot of letters from dog lovers, and you know, I mean, it's a farce, right? But it's real. It happened anyway. So, yeah. Any whatever. Comments before we move on? It's a scene. I'm trying to make a scene.
Yeah.
I just really like thinking about what that piece would be if you hadn't spliced their perspectives.
Yes.
It just seems so much harder to follow and less comedic. Like, I love the fact that you're trying to convey two perspectives on the same thing, and they're complementing each other so perfectly. I can't imagine using another structure than that.
That's interesting.
Amazing.
It reminded me. I remember when I was editing that thing, and I had these two interviews, separate interviews. They were obviously done separately, and I was thinking, well, I think I do one and then I do the other, and I remember thinking the editing, and I'm thinking, you know, so what would it sound like if I tried to put them together? And that was
because then they are illustrating the scene for you. Like, you weren't able to be there, right? You weren't able to. It's not like you're going to recreate sound of this you know, historic event, and so it's a way for them to paint the picture for you. They're doing all the dirty work for you.
They're the only ones that were there. I'm just the vehicle, buddies. I'm the midwife. Here are the actors doing it.
We could picture it very
clearly. So I mean, I don't know how we got away with the language. That was 1978. We put that on the radio, and just before we did, we had a Sunday morning, we had a communication, it wasn't an email in those days, from a representative of Jeremy Thorpe's family, who must have got wind of the fact this documentary was going on the radio here. It was polite. They didn't have any, there was no way they could stop it, obviously, but it was a very polite sort of, like, do you really have to put that on? Can we stop you, you know, blah, 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 blah. If I have, no, I better keep going.
Can we swap these two?
Yes, swap which ones? You want to do herb? Good, Tanya's going to take over.
So this is one that I chose because all of the ones that we've listened to so far and the ones that Steve had, they're fantastic tape. But as someone who has collected not so fantastic tape in the past, this to me was a great example of what to do when you get bad tape and how it can work to your advantage. So it's one that Anna Maria Tremonti, this is her script. This is a piece she produced to launch their Planet Money. Planet Money. Is that, no, what is it called? No, not By Design.
They did,
Last
I think
year's
they did
series.
Planet Money.
Was it called?
I think they did. That rings a bell.
What was their series? Anyways, it's about this guy that won the lottery, and she had such high hopes, and he was a terrible interview. His name was Bob Erb, and he was a massive pothead, and her and Liz Hoth, the producer, and there's one other producer whose name escapes me. Oh, Joan Weber. They got there, and they were, this guy was just like smoking a joint in front of them, and he rambled, and she left and thought that she had absolutely nothing. And this just, to me, was a great example of how you can write around tape and create scenes using tape that's kind of less than perfect, I guess. So this is Bob Erb.
There was probably 4 million in 3 weeks that was distributed. The Hospital Auxiliary, 20,000. The Hospice Society, 20,000. The Legion.
Bob Erb has given away millions in the last 10 months.
Salvation Army, 20,000.
We meet in his driveway.
I'm Anna Maria.
Bob Erb.
Really nice to meet you.
This is where I've been for 23 years. I subdivided.
He's standing there smoking, a trim 60-something. His words are spilling
young
out.
Couple I raised two. That's a trailer in addition.
There's a buzz of activity around his house. It looks roomy, not opulent, a split level. He's got a silver Airstream and a new white Cadillac SUV parked there. A few guys are unloading lumber. He's building a wheelchair ramp for a friend with ALS.
$10,000 check, so we received 3 $10,000 checks, 20 for the construction and then 10 for Christmas.
He's got so much to tell me he barely takes a breath. He's gesturing at his neighbors' houses.
I said, well, I can't pave my huge driveway and not their small one, and so we've prepped and are doing their driveway as well.
But I'm distracted. I'm asking myself, is that a joint he's smoking?
I'm a 15-joint fella. I've been smoking pot for 43 years. I use it as a preventative medicine. Like, why wait till you get sick before you start taking your medicine? I sort of view it as like taking a multivitamin every day, except I take 15 of them. Right from about 4:30 in the morning, I smoke my first joint and until about 10 o'clock at night.
He's wearing a T-shirt emblazoned with a marijuana leaf. Fight the deficit, it says. Legalize it. It seems Bob Erb is a philanthropist with a predisposition for pot. But more about that later.
I really like that. I think we played it there. You guys played a little bit of that during one of the lunch and learns, and I remember really enjoying it then. And it's so funny because I remember doing pieces for a local morning show, and it was always like you can't have like lower voices under the narration because then they can't hear the narration, and they'd always fade it out, and it used to drive me nuts. So it was so nice also just to hear that technique and be like, yeah, it works. Like, it's really great. So I just think it's so yeah, because often you get back and you're like, they were a shitty talker.
Yeah, I really like it because he is doing all the work for you. Like, it's trusting your material. So she came out and it's like, okay, he doesn't speak in sound bites. He's not the most eloquent guy. He was all over the map. But really, your job is to paint a picture of who you're meeting. And what better way to do that than like actually let your listeners hear him be himself?
Yeah. It's a nice dance. No, I think it feels like a nice dance with the tape. She's dancing with the tape. It's kind of nice.
Yeah, and that's why I thought I'd bring the script along, is because you really see how much she's splicing it. Yeah. But it's all very deliberate. She says that it took a very long time to get it faded up in the exact moments that she wanted it to, the exact turns of phrase, and sometimes it's just for a couple of words, but it's all very strategic what those words are, because they help her, push the scene along, and they help in her writing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
it really felt live. Like, that's the one thing, and even though it wasn't, because they created that in the narration, but it feels like you're actually getting to hear what's inside her head. Like, oh my God, he's smoking a joint. Okay, anyways, I'm not going to point that out. I'm just going to pretend I don't notice this and get back to my piece. But it's so honest. It's like you're trying to interview someone, and you know that their pants are down, but that's not your point. You're trying to interview about, and you're kind of they're holding up, why aren't they wearing their pants? So you feel like, oh, I got this real, honest little human observation that is very distracting and really should become the story. And it's just like letting the listeners in on that is great. Yeah.
Quick question. Did she have any idea about what she was getting into before? Like, who was this guy before you met them?
Good question, and she did address that. So this was for the launch of their season, the launch of this new series, and they had this story lined up for months. I can't remember what it was, but it was a big one, and it got dropped like a week before. And so they were freaking out about how to launch this series, and one of her producers found this guy and thought, okay, why don't we try this? And she mentioned to Anna Maria, don't get him talking about pot, because he has a lot of views about pot legalization. But literally they pulled up to his house and had done minimal kind of research, or, it was not, they didn't know what they were going to get. Okay. And so, no, it was really, she came out of it, thought that she had nothing, and she had like very little turnaround time. And so then she realized there's no way I can write around his love of pot. Like, I need to like incorporate it, and it's part of who he is. So
I like especially the feeling that I had anyway, and we'll get to this later this afternoon, that it was almost as if there was a little camera on her shoulders pointing outwards. and Anna Maria was sort of, doing this and this and this, and saying what she saw, and then Buddy was saying what he. So it was kind of almost like a visual thing. I was getting two direction. I was getting this way and then this way and then this way. It's kind of nice.
It's true, and you are getting her mind frame, like you're getting her unfiltered thoughts. And at the same time, I thought it was great that you could hear her voice. So it's like here she's presenting herself to this person, but in the back of her mind, she's sharing with you her
She is, and
thoughts.
there's a nice preservation of surprise too, I think. She seems to be able to capture what she felt, even though I guess she did all the studio scripting later.
Yeah.
So, no,
all right.
that's good.
Onwards
to
France.
Almost to France. There's so many European things, but this is Isabel and Bernard. This was, I hope I'm right in saying this was produced by, in a way, the French equivalent of Peter Leo Brown. His name is René Farabee. If he didn't, I'm sure he'd be. I know he brought it to the conference that year. And the story is simply rather like this Bob Erb, they stumbled on a story that didn't and it was a story of, as you'll hear, of a very old lady and a middle-aged, a much younger guy, and they were married, and it's unusual to have a 40, 50-year age difference between the two of them, and so I think they just said, oh, let's check that out. So just before, I must say, René Farabee, this was fun, but René was, in a wonderful French style, he is a radio documentary producer, he lives in Paris, but he's kind of, it's so French, it's so wonderful. He would produce pieces which are basically philosophic investigations, masquerading as radio documentaries. And there would always be a line of story, which would be the tangible vehicle for René's philosophical peregrinations, whatever. And there was one piece, which I don't have here, about, ostensibly about a French hot air balloonist. Apparently, that seems to be what they all do in France anyway. They go up in a hot air balloon, whatever. Anyway, the piece was about this hot air balloonist, this French guy. And he played an excerpt of it. René played an excerpt from it at a features conference. I happened to be there that year. And again, rather like Bernie's ideas thing, there was a pause after it was finished. And bear in mind, this is Mr. Farabee here, who's done fabulous stuff. But this one? So again, there was a kind of, what do we say about this? Because René's he's a certified genius. I mean, what can I say? I have to say something. But and once again, Leo did this because he says, if no one else is going to say it, I'm going to have to say it. And what he said? And I can quote you. And we've just heard this hot air balloon story, which is weird. For me, this was a piece about a hot air balloon that did not rise.
They did not
rise. Oh, right. The piece never got off the ground. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, you know why we're all in awe of, Leo, he's a wonderful man, but geez, I'll tell you, he'll give it to you right between the eyes. Okay, so, but this piece is different. So here it is, just an excerpt anyway, Isabel and Bernard.
Je suis née en 84, le 24 novembre 1884. J'ai 97. Passé.
Il voudrait savoir comment tu m'as rencontré.
Oh, ben ça c'est un secret. C'est un secret.
Maintenant, dis comment tu m'as rencontré.
Ben, ça s'est brisé tes vitres, une auto. Tu les as refait sur Zanzi. Et puis alors, après ça, était venu me dire bonjour. Ça se crée après. Ça se crée. C'est tout un secret, vous savez, un grand secret. Écoutez, je vous le dis à vous, il m'a aimé aussitôt qu'il m'a vu. Je vais vous dire comment ça s'est passé. La fenêtre était ouverte, vous voyez, il y a le salut du chemin de fer. Je vois un grand jeune homme. Il me dit bonjour madame, bonjour monsieur, puis regarde. Oh, qu'il dit, je suis contrariée, mais qu'est-ce qu'il y a qui ne va pas? Que je lui dis, moi. Hein? Mais figurez-vous, madame, j'ai eu un accident. Le pare-brise était cassé. Oh, ben je dis, vous faites refaire votre pare-brise. Oh, mais oui. Ben, voulez-vous prendre quelque chose? J'ai du bon café, ça va vous remettre. Un bon café. Oh, vous êtes gentil, madame. Vous êtes adorable, il me dit. Ben, je vais vous ouvrir. Bernard est entré chez moi. Alors, il m'a dit, c'est chez vous ici. Oui, oui, c'est à moi la maison. Mon mari est mort. Et ma famille n'est pas ici. Et alors après, qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? Oh, c'est tout un roman. Pour l'écrire, ça serait intéressant. Puis en fin de fil en aiguille, mes bonnes paroles lui ont fait du bien, comprenez-vous. Au lieu de lui dire, oh, c'est rien de ça, tatati, tatata. Non, je lui ai dit, ça se refera, ça. Puis j'y avais offert un bon café.
It is always different reading something in translation and hearing it in their own words, and there were little turns of phrase that were really cute that she was saying, so, yeah.
Anyway, I think it's just charming. I mean, it's actually beautiful, really, in a way, I think. It's such a, love is a secret, right? It's just a secret.
I just want to say something, too, about, I feel like this is a perfect radio piece because reading it, like, when he raises his voice like that, it really drives it home how old she is. It's what makes it such good radio. Yeah. Like, do you want a cup of coffee? Like, you know, she's like yelling at her.
They want to know how we met.
She's hard of hearing. Like, So I think that really drove it home. That was my favorite.
Yeah.
And her voice, like her
voice.
I didn't understand. I don't speak French, but like I just could listen to her voice for forever.
Yeah, it's musical unto itself, isn't it? It's fantastic. Somebody I remember in the discussion said, "Where's the tension in this piece? You know, it's charming, but where's the tension?" And somebody else said, "I think, well, yeah, okay, it's subtle, but you know, there's a lovely tension for me." Everybody says, "For me." You have to preface everything by "for me." That's okay. Once you say "for me," you can say whatever you want, because you're not, you know, it's always what I think. For me, he said that you know, there was this tension between the old voice, what was it now? Such an old voice and such a young theme of love. You know, one associates love as the flowering of youth and everything, and blah, blah, blah. Of course, that's not the case, which proves the point, but of love at any age, but still, there's the expectation, and so this is, you know, whatever. So, you know, anyway, I just think it's, and again, I mean, the pacing, they're pretty relaxed, eh? I mean, the accordion goes on a long time, it's kind of cliche, but, you know, so kind of okay. Last but not least, said he pompously, Toad, this is time for Toad. Where's Toad? And we need him. Pompous Toad, playing something of his own again. Just to wrap it up quickly, this little piece, I call it a souffle. It's not really, it's just a little something where I was experimenting with actually something I really like to experiment with, which is inner voice and outer voice. What the little voice that we all have in our head, which is, Wadhams, you're full of shit. You don't you have that little voice all the time? You're an idiot. You're an idiot. Or well, that wasn't bad. Or the stuff that goes on in the head all the time. Even so, the spark for this was, and this place. Tanya knows the location. There is a certain Starbucks right opposite the subway where I get on every day, and the Starbucks on the street just opposite is usually at this time anyway, it was full of these shiny great SUVs with small women driving huge cars, fast vehicles. And of course we were, I think, and it sort of irritated me that, like, why do you need such a huge, great thing? I mean, you're just going to get a coffee at Starbucks, for God's sake. I mean, you're not going into the bush or anything, but whatever. So this is again and again every day. So I thought, okay, you've got to make something out of this, so try. And this is the piece that got made. I'll just say one thing before about the scripting. I tried it, and it was flat as a pancake, it felt to me, until I tricked on to one device, which you'll hear. It was simply that whatever line I wrote and spoke, the next line had to have some relationship to it. A word, a thought, it had to have an opposite or an amplification or something. There had to be something like that. You know what I mean? It couldn't just be script, 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 script. There had to be some little thing that hooked them together. Anyway, so this is called SUV. It ran, I think, anyway, here it is. Sorry. No, it ran on Sounds Like Canada, I believe. They were kind enough to give it a home. Okay, so just don't look at them. I can't avoid them. You're avoiding something. Well, there's just something wrong about them, that's all. All of them? Well, the small ones are better than the big ones. Is that all you can say about them? I could say a lot about them. So, say it. All of it? Some of it. Maybe you'll feel better. Huge turn for the worse. Stupid, unthinking vehicles. Arrogant, greedy idiots. Power this, power that. Power hungry. Small blonde. Big dog. Cell phone. Coffee cup. Confident. Time on her hands. Winner takes all. You're talking like a loser. A jealous loser. Jacked up, high and mighty, no humility, out of control, crashing down. Serve them right. What if you're wrong? I don't want to be wrong. You don't want to think about being wrong. Admit it. I'll admit that they do look comfortable. Coffee cups. Cruise control. Confidence. Clear goals. Chief executive. Polished performance. Iron will. Shiny chrome. Shining example. Happy. Hopeful. High on life. High. Would you talk to her if she smiled at you? I might be crushed. Why do you always roll over so easily? It would be easier if she was driving one of the smaller ones. Well, that's your big problem. What problem? Size. Well, the bigger they come, don't fall for that one. That's old hat. Anyway, we'd have nothing to talk about. Look at her. She's cut from a different cloth. It's hopeless. You'll wear yourself out if you go on like that. Anyway, I like who I am. And I'd like it if you'd live a little once in a while. I've lived long enough to know what I like, thank you very much. The long and the short of it is, you've never been in one. You've never driven one. So why don't you get off your high horse? My high horse? That's rich. Poor you. What? What will you do when they figure out fusion? Oh, don't confuse things. Fusion is a pipe dream. Unlimited, pollution-free power. Consume all you like. You're not going to swallow that, are you? Wings to fly. It was probably people like you who said we'd never get off the ground. And now look at us. Well, I'm looking at something that will sink the human race. All right, that's it. People who think there's no tomorrow. I've heard enough. And look at her. She's had the engine idling all the time we've been talking. I'm finished with you. What do you mean? I was just getting started. So, it's kind of fun.
Like Gollum.
What? Gollum. So I did 4 or 5 of those different scenarios like that. It was just fun. So.